Warning, this content is for entertainment and educational purposes only. All right, folks, Big Paul here for another anabolic Q&A. I've got a good one lined up for you today. I got a bunch more HGH questions. People love their growth hormone questions. I'm going to talk about growth hormone timing yet again on another Q&A. It's a subject that clearly needs more definition for people. I also have a question about using Superdrol as a Kickstarter to a cycle. I'll give you my thoughts on Superdrol in the off season. And we have a question about tracking progress and how you do that in a bodybuilding context. Did dudes in the 70s and 80s use growth hormone? How to maintain insulin sensitivity on a bulk, and we have a bunch of other questions coming in this Q&A. All of these questions came from my Anabolic Bodybuilding School members site. Folks, you can join the member site for $30 a month. It costs less than what you're probably spending on energy drinks every month. Just drink a few less energy drinks, and you can get your questions on the weekly Q&A. I also answer questions over there daily in our forum. I have some free coursework over there as well on insulin use, the blast and cruise methodology, carb cycling. I have some stuff over there that is included in the course. You can check out little mini courses that are a part of the members community. We have over 100 members right now, a great group of people over there, very fantastic information and quality group of human beings that share an interest in bodybuilding and performance enhancement. I think you'll enjoy it. All right, enough of that stuff. Let me get away from the sales pitch and head into the questions, and we'll get started in just 1 second. All right, first question I've got up here is from Jeremy O'Brien. Jeremy asks, opinions on using orals intermittently, strictly as a pre-workout 1 to 2 times a week on the day of training, a week or lacking body part, or should I just run them regularly for a few weeks at a time? I love having orals as spot duty for a pre-workout. I will occasionally sprinkle in Anavar. I find Anavar to be well tolerated. It does seem to have a pretty strong effect on lowering HDL. But if you're only using it once or twice a week pre-workout for a weaker body part to give you a kick in the ass for your workouts, it really isn't that profound of an effect. Also, Anavar seems to be fairly gentle on the liver out of all the orals, and it's likely the safest choice if you want a pre-workout kick in the pants. I, in the past, would run Anavar at 50 milligrams a couple days a week as a pre-workout on body parts that I needed to hit. Actually, it's a strategy I employed. I would run it on my back workouts and sometimes on legs to get an extra kick in the pants, an extra pump, a little extra hardness. Now, with that said, you do have to pay attention to how orals affect your digestion. A lot of times orals will fuck up your stomach. Anavar seems to be fairly gentle on it. In my experience, Anadrol is the worst for melting your stomach. In the off-season, Anadrol is also an option if you needed a kick in the pants for a workout. Now, Anadrol will blow your blood pressure up, but if you're looking for purely CNS motivation pre-workout, something to give you an extra bit of drive for an enhancement in your strength during a workout, if that's literally what you're trying to leverage, it's just an increase in performance, Anadrol is probably going to be the most potent. I feel like Anavar gets you like 70% of that without all of the added side effects that you get from Anadrol, like the high blood pressure, the melting of your stomach, and all the other problems that happens. But I really liked Anadrol as a pre-workout when I was younger. I can't really tolerate it that well anymore. So if I were going to lean into something, I'd probably use Anadrol once in a blue moon if you're a younger guy that tolerates things well. If you just need a performance enhancement, Anavar is another option. On contest prep, I like halotestin towards the end to get an extra bit of drive. Halotestin is also very liver toxic, so you want to limit your use of it, and it will wreck your lipids. All right, up next, we have a question from Philip Fuller, another oral anabolic question. Philip asks, what are your thoughts on Superdrol, its effectiveness as a kickstarter or a finisher to a cycle? I am not a fan of Superdrol. I know some dudes love it. I have tried it. It makes me feel like absolute dog shit. It melts my stomach. My liver enzymes go through the roof. It seems like it really pushes guys' liver enzymes up. The only time that I would consider using Superdrol is going into the show, contest prep, going into a show, using it as a polish finisher, whatever you want to call it, going into the last couple of weeks before a show. I personally would prefer halo testing for that effect, but Superdrol tends to get you that full, strong look that Anadrol will get without water retention. And, that I really do not like it in the off season. As I mentioned before, I think there are much better options in the off season. I do not like using orals as a starter to a cycle because purely just increasing your anabolic load with injectables at the beginning of a cycle is going to be plenty to get you going. Where I find that you need more is as you get closer to the end when you get stuck. I like to taper up things, use whatever I can get away with to get the job done. And to me, it makes more sense to taper up and, not come out of the gate with a bunch of harsh stuff and then just make yourself sick 4 to 6 weeks into a cycle. To me, there's just no point into it. Just tapering up your doses alone of injectable anabolics at the beginning of a cycle is going to be enough by itself to get progress. Where you get stuck is at the end, and sometimes towards the end of a cycle, say 16 to 20 weeks, I will drop in an oral towards the end of a off-season cycle, maybe for like 4 weeks. Anymore, I mostly it's going to be Anavar if I'm going to use anything. Anadrol, if you can tolerate it, is great for CNS motivation. As I mentioned before, if you're looking for a kick in the pants for strength, if you're a power lifter, Anadrol is a great option. For old school bodybuilders love Anadrol, but man, it will wreck your stomach after a while. To me, it just melts my stomach. I end up getting acid reflux. I can't eat. I lose my appetite. That my liver enzymes start to go up. I can tell when I've hit my limit with Anadrol these days. In a very, very rare occasion, D-ball is an option if you're somebody who's a low estrogen converter. If you want to toss in some D-ball, but honestly, if I were going to toss in something, it would be just Anavar pre-workout, 4 to 5 days a week towards the end of a cycle. That's just my preference. Maybe it makes sense to take it more consistently. I like it pre-workout to get that CNS drive pre-workout towards the end of a cycle if I need a little extra kick in the pants, something to get me over the top. But anymore, as an older bodybuilder, I tend to just lean into injectables outside of contest prep. I'll employ some orals towards the end on contest prep. Otherwise, I have very, very limited use of orals at this point in my journey. I just don't find them to add a whole lot to my off season. They impact my digestion negatively. They impact my lipids negatively. And I just feel bad after I take them for a while. They just don't really help. If you're a young guy, it might be a different consideration towards the end of a cycle. I find that they can be beneficial. But starting off a cycle with them, I don't like the whole idea of front-loading orals at the beginning of a cycle. I think it's unnecessary. You're going to get growth regardless at the beginning of a cycle just from the increased anabolic load. Aaron G asks, I'm not really sure what he's talking about here, but I'm going to make some assumptions. How do I place Yohimbine HCl in my cut to bulk phase, and what are your recommended doses? I'm assuming you're talking about the cut. We wouldn't use it in the off season. I don't see a compelling reason to use it when you're in a bulk or rebound phase. If you're in a caloric surplus, it doesn't make a whole lot of sense to use Yohimbine HCl. Now, I will tell you the devil with Yohimbine. Some people love it, some people hate it. I would say probably about half the people that take it end up, it just makes you feel like dog shit. Honestly, out of any of the fat burning aids that we use, it makes me feel worse than any of them. It makes me feel worse than ephedrine, anything else that without I've never used DMP. I've heard DMP is terrible. I wouldn't even put it in as an option. But Yohimbine makes me feel ill. And the only way I can tolerate it is through Helios when it's injectable. Yohimbine, that doesn't seem to mess me up as much. A lot of people feel ill on the Yohimbine. So if you can tolerate it well, then it's something that you can use. It works best when combined in an ECY stack. Using it solo doesn't provide a whole lot of benefit in my experience. It acts as a selective alpha-2 receptor agonist. It basically acts as a brake on the alpha-2 receptor, increasing norepinephrine effectiveness. It blocks the alpha-2 receptor on the fat cell, and those normally tell the fat cell to stop releasing fat. It also, from what I understand, stops the storage of fat for a temporary period of time. I'm not a biochemist, so don't quote me on all of that. This is just what I recall. Basically, what it does is it keeps the tap, so to speak, open, allowing adrenaline to cause more release of lipids and increases fat burning for a temporary period of time. And you need to be in a low-carb, insulin-free state for it to even be effective, from what I understand. And for it to really shine, it needs to be in a stack with, usually with, you'll hear people talk about ephedrine, caffeine, Yohimbine stack, ECY stack. They pair up well because ephedrine increases norepinephrine. It is a beta-2 agonist, non-selective beta-2 agonist, not like clenbuterol where it's a selective beta-2 agonist. The caffeine prevents CAMP breakdown. And the Yohimbine removes the inhibitory tone of the alpha-2 receptor. So they all synergize to work together to increase fat burning for a temporary period of time. So the way I would like to run it on a contest prep, what I will do is I just take the ECY stack in the morning, or I'll use Helios, which has clenbuterol and Yohimbine together. The clenbuterol is a substitute for the ephedrine. That's also an option, and you can just drink a cup of coffee. And I'll do that in the morning before my fasted cardio. And then, like, my first couple of meals of the day when I am on a contest prep, I won't eat any carbs. And then I do my lifting later in the day where I'll stack my carbohydrates around my workout. And by that time, it's already worn off. And also, if you do it later in the day, you're not going to be able to fucking sleep. As long as you tolerate it, it works well in the ECY stack. I personally... I've gotten to the point now where I'm kind of leaning away from all these stimulants. The problem with running these damn things, they blow up your blood pressure. And from what we have seen, long-term negative health effects with bodybuilding, I think a lot of it just comes from poor blood pressure management. And dudes end up blowing out their fucking kidneys long-term. You end up with arterial damage from high blood pressure, and then you lay down plaque, and it's just a cascade of bad things. End up with left ventricular hypertrophy, all the results of high blood pressure. So if we can limit the times that we have high blood pressure, it probably makes sense. I'm honestly, at this point, I'm leaning more into retatrutide, things like SLU that don't seem to blow up blood pressure. In fact, may even help lower blood pressure. And then maybe using just a small dose of clenbuterol, which is a selective beta-2 agonist, which doesn't seem to be as aggressive at raising blood pressure as such as what the ECY stack would be. So I think that's probably the better and safer option. But in ECY stack, it's very effective if you can tolerate it. If you have blood pressure under control, it is an option. It does work very well. All right, next question is from my friend on the Anabolic Bodybuilding member site, George Peterson, a.k.a. the impatient motherfucker. George asks, what has been your experience with running keto diets due to keto or Atkins type diet in various stages of the training cycle? Do I absolutely need fiber, non-fiber carbohydrates ever? Sorry. Carbohydrates are optional. I like the energy burn when in ketosis. My kidney function does not seem to suffer as I consume enough fats and fiber to take the pressure off the kidneys I don't know that fats and fiber are going to take pressure off the kidneys. So they do not process the excess protein. I don't think that's really going to have any effect on kidney health, having fiber in there. And really, if you look at the modern studies, the excess protein intake, unless you already have impaired glomerular filtration, doesn't seem to have any negative effect on kidney health. Really, what blows out kidneys, as I mentioned before, is uncontrolled high blood pressure. Ketosis is an option. Here's the thing with keto diets. Keto diets are basically they're a diet where you're going to remove all carbohydrates from your thing. They're an elimination diet. And when you remove carbohydrates, it's not that there's some miracle to fat loss with ketosis. There's nothing special about it that makes you lose fat any more rapidly than any other type of diet. It's just a simple, easy way to diet. I think it works for most people because they don't have to calorie count, because by the very nature of removing carbohydrates, there's no potatoes, there's no potato chips, there's no French fries, there's no ice cream, there's no sandwiches, there's no hamburgers, there's no French fries. You're removing all of the trash food that makes you fat, the high fat, high carbohydrate, highly palatable food that people binge on and overeat that makes them fat. And so really all you're doing at the end of the day, it's just a clever way of creating a calorie deficit. Now, with that said, it depends on what your goals are. If you're purely looking for fat loss, it is a simple and easy way to burn fat. And to, people, you'll hear all the keto zealots talk about fat adaptation, and your body is always adapted to burning fat. You can eat carbohydrates, have a low fat diet, and be in a caloric deficit, and your body's still going to burn fat. There's not some magic where you burn more fat being on a keto diet. You're just simply creating a calorie deficit in your shifting. Now, we can make an argument that a lot of people, to be truly in ketosis, you really need to keep the protein low. If you're eating high protein, you're not really going to be in true ketosis. What'll happen is your body will actually shift to gluconeogenesis, will start converting those excess proteins into glucose through gluconeogenesis. Your body always prefers glucose as a fuel source, primarily, and ketones are a last resort. And there are many downstream effects that are negative from being in ketosis. Ketosis itself is not, the keto zealots will argue, but it's not really a great thing for you. You're in a starvation state. And if you want to preserve performance in the gym, having some carbohydrates present is really going to keep your performance up in the gym. Now, with that said, I don't particularly have a problem with keto diets. I have some of my clients running, I wouldn't exactly call them keto diets, but I have some of my clients on 0 to low carbohydrate diets, essentially a protein sparing modified fast where we keep the fats moderately low and we force calories as low as we can. Essentially, once again, another way to create a calorie deficit to get the fat off. If the keto diet helps keep you compliant, really, diet compliance is the most important thing for fat loss. You're not going to lose fat if you can't stick to the diet. So if a keto diet helps you stay compliant, then by all means, run a keto diet. It's better than eating the shit average American diet. And a lot of people talk about how keto diets have changed their life and made them feel better. Of course, when you stop eating French fries, potato chips, ice cream, fast food, McDonald's, all that shit, you are going to lower inflammation. You are going to increase fat burning because you are in a calorie deficit. You're probably going to feel better because you're not eating all that shit processed food anymore. It's not that there's some magic from the ketosis that's doing it. You basically have eliminated all the trash from your diet and you made yourself feel better. So long story short, the best diet is the diet that you can stick to. I don't think ketosis is the most optimal option if muscle growth and performance enhancement is your objective. But if you enjoy keto, if you can stick to it, if it's easy for you, if it's something that you can maintain, then by all means run a keto diet. All right, next question is from John Harris. He said, what is the difference between all of the growth hormone peptides? Would you benefit from taking more than one at a time, like somatropin and CJC 1295? Well, John, somatropin is growth hormone. It's not a hormone peptide. Well, growth hormone is a peptide. It's 191 amino acid. But somatropin is growth hormone. In CJ1295, it increases GHRH signaling. It's a growth hormone secretagogue essentially. And here's my thing: like, there's other ones. They're GnRH. There's GHRP. There's you have CJC. You have all of these other ones. I can't remember the names of the other ones off the top of my head, but anyway, I've explained this before. So here's the thing. Let's say like something like CJC is going to get you, I remember, I'm just pulling this off the top of my head, but something like a 20 to 40% increase in growth hormone production. I'm really dumbing this down. This is very non-scientific, so the biochemists out there, the smart dudes that are smarter than me, don't shame me for slaughtering this, but this is just my bro logic explanation of it. Thinking about it from this angle. Let's say your body is producing the equivalent of a half a unit of GH per day. Your pituitary is producing that much, and you're a 40-year-old guy. That 20 to 40% increase, let's just say you have a 20% increase from using your growth hormone secretagogue. Sounds like a lot, doesn't it? But when you really put it into the context of, let's say we even went up to 40% increase and you're making a half a unit per day, you've went from a half a unit to 0.7 units. So I really, how much of a difference is that going to make in your performance? You're going to get way more benefit just from taking growth hormone. And most of these growth hormone secreting peptides or fragments of growth hormone or end up costing more than just buying just some good generic growth hormone and running that growth hormone. Take 2 to 4 units of generic growth hormone and save yourself a bunch of money and get way better of an effect. I just really think most of these, for older guys, most of these growth hormone secretagogues are just a waste of time and a waste of money. Just take growth hormone. You're going to get way more out of it. Next question here is from my friend Rocky Fenton. Rocky asks, Paul, how do you personally track progression over time? Are you more focused on the logbook numbers, visual changes, internal cues like pumps and recovery? I would like to know the metrics that matter to you when you're pushing for size. I was obsessed with the logbook when I was younger. I like having a goal in front of me that I can smash and progressively improve in the gym. It's just easier for me to have a goal that I can chase and move forward. And I don't do that anymore. I'm going to tell you why here in a minute. I think if you're a young lifter, a young bodybuilder early on in your journey and you're just trying to grow, and this was the brilliance of the DC training by Dante Trudel, which I did a lot of when I was younger. If you are lifting weights within context of bodybuilding form, controlled form on your lifts, if you're keeping your form consistently the same and you're progressing those lifts and your weight is going up, there's only one possible outcome. Really, you have gotten probably a bigger muscle within the same, or a stronger muscle within the same constraints of form is likely going to be a bigger muscle. Now, it doesn't always seem to translate that way one for one. I am, last year I was the biggest I've ever been. And I definitely wasn't the strongest I've ever been. Now, that's not to say a bigger muscle is not a stronger muscle. I think earlier on, when you're early in your training journey, learning how to lift like a bodybuilder is very important, and then progressively increasing your weights. You do hit a point later on in your journey as you go from that intermediate to more advanced bodybuilding stage where you really just can't progress your lifts anymore. Chasing the logbook almost becomes impossible at this point. It really becomes a fallacy at that point where you just can't. I mean, like, look, if you're, and I'm using a hypothetical. Let's say if you're bench pressing 405 for reps, how much more are you going to increase? And then you also, as you get bigger and you continue to push the weights up, you are radically increasing risk at that point. And you can see it within powerlifting. Some of the strongest powerlifters I've seen are nowhere near as big as bodybuilders. Now, that's not to say, once again, that a bigger muscle isn't a stronger muscle. We do know that. And ultimately, with hypertrophy, what drives hypertrophy is mechanical tension. What I will say for me as a bodybuilding coach, what matters the most to me is progression in the progress pics. That's how I most accurately gauge progression now. I use various metrics. I'll have guys track their training sometimes. Sometimes I don't. I really have kind of gotten away from it. I'll have guys track their body weight. If I see the scale go up, but the body composition is better than it was before, if I see the scale go up and body composition has improved, we know we put on muscle. That is pretty clear and pretty evident to me. If you've gotten stronger, I just tell guys within context of their training, have you gotten stronger? I don't need to know exact numbers. Now, what I will say is if you are tracking numbers, you will have more intent in your training. I did find that when I was using the logbook consistently, my training had more purpose to it. And I do think it's likely important in the early part of your training to do that, but you do get to a point where your body just will break. I got to that point later on where I couldn't continue to push to failure or past failure. And that is the paradox of chasing the logbook. Eventually you get to a point where you start cheating a little bit because you want to beat your previous numbers. It gets in your head that you have to beat your previous numbers when that's not always the case. Sometimes you can do other things to increase mechanical tension, such as changing your form, changing rep speed, changing exercise choices, or doing more sets, exposing your muscle to more time under tension. I mean, there's just so many variables there as you get bigger that contribute to growth. So for me, depending on what your goals are, if your goal is to be a bodybuilder, ultimately the progress pics are really what matters. Have you progressively improved your physique? And to me, that is the most important thing. Progress pics for me, like now with coaching, I want to see improvement in progress pics, and I'll have my clients send me weekly progress pics along with their weight. And when I'm gauging progress, when I'm doing check-ins, I look at progress pics this week. I look at your check-in pics this week. I compare them to the starting pics that I had, and I look at them from week to week to see if there's any basically changes in body composition or fluid retention, things that we can gauge. But really, like week to week, you're not going to see much growth or changes. You'll see changes in water retention. You'll see lack of fullness, more fullness, things like that. And then we line that up with the scale, like I was saying earlier. So if weight has gone up, body composition is maintained, then we know that we have added more muscle mass. It's pretty clear. If strength has increased along with it, that's also an indicator that we have added. Same thing on contest prep. If we see the scale going down, if we see weight going down, the look is worsening, and strength is going down, then we got a problem we need to fix. So all of these are tools that we can use to measure, and it gets more nuanced, man. It just gets so nuanced. So I'm sorry to give you an ambiguous answer, but ultimately for bodybuilding, in the sport of bodybuilding, how you look is what matters the most. Eric Lubin asks, did the dudes in the early 70s and into early mid 80s take growth hormone, for example? He sent some pics over of guys back then. No, those guys back then weren't using growth hormone. I don't think growth hormone was officially synthesized until the mid 80s. And it was genetically engineered at that point, from what I recall. Before that, they used, was it Krebs Corman? I can't remember the name of it. It was the shit that they would take out of the cadavers. And then they found out that it caused Creutzfeldt-Jakob disease, basically mad cow disease. Your brain would melt, you turn into mashed potatoes. There was that risk of it. And the growth hormone extracted from pituitaries of dead people was a bad idea. I'm sure there were athletes that dabbled with it beforehand, but I didn't really hear of growth hormone really becoming a thing in bodybuilding until synthetic growth hormone, genetically engineered growth hormone, became available. There were bodybuilders dabbling in it. From what I understand, in the early 90s, you can look back and you can clearly see the delineation of when physiques change. It's really fucking apparent. In the early 90s, you can see when dudes went from, the guys that were winning the Olympia titles in the 80s were like, 220, 230. And then there was this huge leap forward to Dorian Yates. I think Dorian was like 255 or 260 on stage, something like that. Don't quote me on the exact weight. And you can see that year, you can clearly see when Dorian, I think it was from his first to second year as a pro, when growth hormone, I would guess, I could be wrong, but I would guess that growth hormone was implemented, or maybe it was implemented before then. You can see the clear leap forward in his physique where he put on like 20 pounds of stage weight in a year, something like that. But you could see the delineation line. You can see the physiques all up through the 80s, the 70s and 80s. They didn't really change that much. Guys all kind of looked the same. They were smaller. They kind of looked like what classic physique guys would be today, or maybe even men's physique. You go back and look at Frank Zane. Dude was like 180 pounds, something like that. He'd be a men's physique guy today in today's bodybuilding, maybe. And Lee Haney looks like a classic physique guy. Arnold looked like a classic physique guy. Those were kind of the top end physiques that were achievable on just steroidal anabolics alone. And then when growth hormone came into the picture, then there was a huge leap forward in the size of bodybuilders. And then there was another leap forward in the 2000s when more dudes started using insulin. Guys were definitely dabbling with insulin in the 80s, but guys kind of figured out how to use insulin. And then generic growth hormone became available, and it became affordable and accessible to more people in the, 2005 to 2010-ish range. And the prices on growth hormone dropped. And before then, it was just recently on a podcast with Broderick Chavez talking about this, you didn't see masters bodybuilders. They didn't exist. And now, I just was at Masters Nationals. I was a super heavyweight in the 50 over division. You didn't see super heavyweight 50-year-olds 20 years ago. They didn't exist. Guys were pretty much done in their early 40s. Same thing in professional sports. You could see it there. With the outlier of the occasional punter or some, weird position like that, you didn't see guys playing football in their 40s. Fuck, Tom Brady played till he's mid-40s. And LeBron James is still going strong, and, dude's in, I don't know how old he is, but I'm guessing he's in his 40s. And he, clearly looks like he's using some growth hormone to me. But you can see the transformation. Growth hormone has allowed guys to stay younger for longer. And it has transformed the sport of bodybuilding. You see bigger, thicker, denser, more robust, resilient bodybuilders that can sustain the sport for a longer period of time. Growth hormone has been the huge catalyst to that. So the physiques you see now weren't around in the 70s and 80s. You can see the clear delineation when growth hormone entered the sport of bodybuilding. It was the early 90s when that line was crossed. You can go back and look at those old pictures. You can see when it happened. Next question here is from my client, Paul Robinson. He asked, in order of priority, what have you found to most positively affects insulin sensitivity in the later stages of a massing phase? Let's assume daily activity, lifting, good sleep, hygiene, and stress management. For me, in the off-season, insulin sensitivity, especially when you're running high doses of growth hormone and you're using high carbohydrate diet and you're using insulin, the more this is the devil's deal with using insulin. The more you use insulin, the more insulin resistance you're going to have. It's going to raise insulin resistance over a period of time. The more you're blasting carbohydrates, growth hormone, and in hitting the insulin use, there is a window of opportunity there where it's the benefits start to decline and eventually end up being outweighed by the negative downside effects of insulin resistance that in metabolic disorders that happen. And you'll see it, a lot of older bodybuilders are diabetic, end up diabetic. Guys don't openly talk about it. I'm a diabetic. I don't know how much of a role bodybuilding really played into my diabetes. It's genetic, it runs in my family. I'm not a type 2, I'm type 1.5, but I still have battled with insulin resistance from periods of time. When you're blasting a bunch of carbs and you're taking insulin, it's going to happen. Now, things that you can do to mitigate it, this is why I like carb cycling diets. You are limiting your exposure to high carbohydrates and insulin to 1 to 2 days per week. And then we'll have days where we take the carbohydrates really low. We'll have our low days, and then we'll have our medium days, which are essentially isocaloric or maybe in a slight surplus. So really, we only are running in a steep caloric surplus a couple days a week, and we keep the fats very low when we're doing it. And we're only using insulin on those days and limiting our exposure to insulin and high carbohydrates to days when we're should be somewhat glycogen depleted. And then we have 1 to 2 days a week where we're in a steep caloric surplus, and we limit our exposure there. And I think that buys us more time in an off season where we can allow ourselves to maintain insulin sensitivity throughout an off season. And you'll hit the wall eventually. I usually find at the 16 to 20 week mark, guys, the wheels just kind of start to fall off, and you need a break. You need to shift into a diet and shift into a caloric deficit, reset insulin sensitivity. That's why guys grow. I think one of the reasons why guys have rebounds after a long diet phase is just insulin sensitivity is at an all-time high. Coming out of a diet phase where you've been in a caloric deficit, myostatin's probably lower. All the inhibitory, the body's inhibitory effects for limiting growth are at an all-time low, and you have this window of opportunity where you can grow rapidly. Now, there are other tools that we can use in the off-season to extend and improve insulin sensitivity. Certainly, cardio helps. Cardio is probably a simple and easy one that you can do. Fasted cardio, I know everybody will argue about fasted cardio not making any difference for fat loss. It's ultimately about net energy balance, but I do think fasted cardio has a more profound effect on protecting insulin sensitivity. This could be just all pseudoscience and bro logic, but I have my theories on it. Berberine is another tool that you can employ. Metformin is a tool that guys used to use. But now we have GLP-1s at our fingertips. More specifically, retatrutide, I think could be a really potent tool for guys to use in an off-season at a low dose to help maintain insulin sensitivity, proper metabolic health. We pair that up with the other things that we have with the carb cycling diet, limiting exposure to insulin to just 1 to 2 days per week. Running, and this is another thing I think dudes do too, is they end up running their growth hormone all day, splitting up their doses. You talk to the guys that splitting up the doses of the growth hormone throughout the day. A lot of them end up insulin resistant and make themselves diabetic. That ain't a coincidence. I would only run insulin in the off season in a somewhat fasted state, and the only time that we're kind of fasted in the off season is at night. So it probably makes more sense to use your GH at night during an off season phase. It's just my theory. If you want to maintain insulin sensitivity, if you're splitting the doses up throughout the day, while you're eating carbohydrates, and your natural endogenous insulin production is going to be higher because of the carbohydrates. and you're taking GH during the day and shifting your body to lipolysis, you're probably going to, increase insulin secretion and downstream, and have an increased risk of insulin resistance and long-term risk of diabetes. So I would say that could also play a factor. It's not going to affect you short-term, but long-term it definitely could. So I would employ all of those tools. Really, the simple and easiest thing to probably start off with is a carb cycling diet, keeping some cardio in place, over-the-counter stuff like berberine. Next line of defense would be a GLP-1, potentially running metformin, or both together. Those are other options. And then just do a good hard diet once a year. This is why guys that are perma-bulkers that say they never, they need the 2 or 3 year off season, eventually they just hit the wall and then they just start getting fatter. And when you start getting fatter, it's usually a sign that there's some sort of metabolic impairment going on, and your body is probably insulin resistant. And you just get to this point where, you're hormonally, you're just in a bad state, increased estradiol conversion from being fat, and when aromatase is up, and then you have insulin resistance on top of it. And in this, the 2 year off season just never fucking works in my experience. You just end up fat. So I would do one good hard cut per year, use those other tools in the off season to keep your insulin sensitivity in check. And that should long-term yield more growth potential. All right, next up, question from my client, Eric Shea. Eric, I'm going to entertain you because you are my client. There's a lot of growth hormone questions. I feel like I answer these every couple weeks. When not on prep, do you think there's any benefit of splitting GH up if you're over 4 units? For example, 7 units per day, 4 units at night, 3 units in the morning, or is this the same benefit to take all 7 units of at night? So I just sort of explained it in the previous question. To me, the risk of splitting the doses up throughout the day is increased insulin resistance, and long-term making yourself a diabetic. I think it makes the most sense in the off-season. I've tried it both ways, and I have definitely seen a decline in my glucose numbers with running a CGM when I split the doses up throughout the day. I know there are people that say it doesn't happen. I used to think that myself, and it doesn't happen overnight. It just kind of sneaks up on you. After a while, you start seeing your glucose levels are a little bit higher, a little bit higher, a little bit higher, and then dudes will throw in shit like Lantus to deal with it. And a lot of times when I hear guys running Lantus, the reason why they're running Lantus is not because of some performance enhancement effect, is that they're having insulin resistance, and they need to use the Lantus to pull their glucose levels back down in line, when really they should probably be addressing the underlying insulin resistance that's going on and fixing that, rather than using Lantus to mask that. And the problem is when you use more insulin, then you end up with more insulin resistance. So long story short, growth hormone peaks at about 2 to 3 hours. It's present for about 6 to 8 hours, at least the lipotic effect of it, lasts for somewhere, assuming you're doing subcutaneous injections. Intramuscular injections are going to be more rapid. But then it declines, and then with IGF-1, which is really the effect that we're trying to leverage from growth hormone in the off season, increased IGF-1 usually peaks, from what I understand, somewhere 6 to 8 hours after you take the growth hormone, and then stays sustained for multiple days after the growth hormone. Something like 2 to 4 days, if I recall correctly. So the increased effect of IGF-1 is going to be present no matter what. So really, taking a single bolus during the day, which is the way the drug is designed to be taken, if you look at any prescription-based growth hormone at all, it says take it at night before bed in a single bolus dose. That's how it's prescribed. And it's done that way for a reason, because they do understand that it increases insulin resistance, and then that is a risk. So I would say in the off season, do it that way. During contest prep, we could make an argument if you're not eating carbohydrates and we want to leverage additional lipolysis throughout the day, that splitting up the dose might make sense. only if you're eating a very low carbohydrate diet, in my opinion, would that make sense. Then it makes sense to split up the dose throughout the day to get an enhanced lipotic effect, increased lipolysis, fat burning. Otherwise, just take the whole dose at night the way the drug was designed to be used. All right, next question here is from Brandon Terranova. We got another GH question, folks. I feel like this is the GH episode. Brandon said, I know, another GH question. This might seem obvious, but there's so many conflicting ideas around this. I get worse side effects of GH when I dose it at night. I wake up with my hands are numb and I have nerve compression. I get less side effects when I dose it GH during the day. Is this due to the dose of GH during the day versus nighttime? What are the risks versus rewards? I'm almost certain that my side effects are related to the fact that I'm not necessarily tracking my diet, salt intake right now. I'm kind of just going off a feel and getting as muscular as possible. I'm sure tracking my sodium intake would be beneficial. Well, you kind of hit the nail on the head there. If you are tracking your diet, I mean, how can you be sure it's the GH? The nerve compression that happens with GH that causes the numb hands is largely related to the water retention that GH drives. And certainly, that's probably the more contributing factor to what's going on. Is I would definitely make sure you clean up your diet. Some people get more water retention from GH than others. I find that over time that it tends to balance out. And there are other things that can make it worse too, like having higher estradiol levels, certain compounds that you're leveraging, like if you're using D-bol or DECA along with it, which is going to drive more water retention on top of what the GH does. All of these things are going to contribute to that nerve compression from the water retention. GH drives renin-angiotensin, the renin-angiotensin-aldosterone system. So, I mean, there are some things you could do. You could potentially take a ARB that's going to help with that. But I would probably start off with the diet first and some cardio. Switch to light salt, get your potassium intake up, magnesium intake up, lower the sodium intake. Monitor other drugs that may be causing increased water retention as well. So, like I mentioned, D-bol and DECA, those are other offenders. See where your estrogen is at. If your estrogen's too high, that's also going to drive water retention as well. I would work on getting that down. I know in a clinical setting, I've heard of prescribers telling people to alternate their GH doses, do them every other day, maybe even pull the doses down until the side effects subside. A clear example of it, like nobody gets numb hands from GH on contest prep. They typically don't. And the reason why, because you're on a diet, you're doing cardio, you're paying closer attention to your diet, usually estrogen's being controlled. Guys are using compounds that drive less water retention, and so you just are holding less water. So usually that additional water retention is not causing pressure on the median nerve, which is going to cause the hand tingling in the soft tissue of the nerve. So less water retention, less issues. I would maybe lower the dose, maybe go to every other day dosing, as we established earlier. IGF-1 stays sustained for a couple days anyway. So, we could potentially do a bolus dose once, every 2 days, and see if that helps with the water retention. But I would address the other underlying issues that could be, or factors, that could be driving the water retention. Resolve those first. Probably the easiest thing to start off with is just cleaning up your fucking diet, doing a little bit of cardio, lowering sodium intake, increasing potassium and magnesium intake a tad. You still need some salt, but you want your electrolytes to be in balance. I believe the ratio of potassium to sodium is somewhere in the 3-2 neighborhood. You want to keep yourself in that range. You just buy light salt. That's a trick I learned from Dr. Dean St. Mart. It's already proportioned out in the proper ratio, so you don't have to worry about it. The thinking's done for you. Use that to season your foods with. Stop eating McDonald's. I know I love my McDoubles. Stop taking D-bol. D-bol's awesome, but also makes you bloated up. Don't run too much DECA. Don't let your estrogen go wildly high, despite what some other people say. You'll thank me later. Your deck will work better. You'll have less water retention. Your hands won't be numb. You'll be a much happier dude. You can actually spank it without your hands being numb. Your whole life will be better as a result, my friend. All right, folks, that's all I got for you on this one. I appreciate each and every one of you. Thank you for your support. I love you guys, all of you, even the trolls that say I'm an idiot in the comment section. You are the person that needs a hug more than anybody. My love goes out to you, too. See you on the next episode, folks. For coaching or consultations, head over to www.anabolicbodybuilding.com to book your spot today. I can help you with optimizing hormones, fat loss, muscle gain, physique, athletic performance, nutrition, and health. For more information, shoot me an email at bigp3rd@gmail.com.